I see this as a change process, a beginning of a change process, both in terms of workers' rights as well as safety issues. The new unions are giving hope that it is a change that is happening for the benefit of the workers, and also the safety issues gaining momentum in Bangladesh. I see this is a very, very good beginning.
You're watching The World from Below, and that was a clip of the International Labour Organisation Country Director for Bangladesh discussing the changes put in place after the Rana Plaza disaster. Tonight we're talking with Josh Cullinan from the Australian Bangladesh Solidarity Network and Carolyn Kitto from Stop the Traffik. Carolyn, for those who are concerned about what they've heard about modern slavery in the garment industry, are there any certification systems that cast some form of transparency over the supply chain in the fashion industry?
There are literally dozens and dozens of certification systems over a garment, and regrettably there isn't one that traces the entire supply chain. So some of them focus on the harvest, and so one of the focus areas there is Uzbekistan, where the citizens are used as a slave labour force. Children, doctors, nurses, mental health patients pick the cotton crop for the profit of the dictator family. So there are a group of Australian companies that have pledged to exclude Uzbekistan cotton. David Jones was the last one of those to do that, and now all Australian fashion labels and retailers that are in the ASX 200 have said they'll exclude Uzbekistani cotton. So we have a fair visibility at the harvest end because you know where that's happening. There are some that also then certify at the cut, make, trim end, and because you can also get a sense of where that happens. What we're talking about is what happens in between that, which is the spinning, weaving, dyeing. And part of the reason why this exploitation happens is because of our drive for a fast fashion cycle. Mm-hmm. You know, one month it's purple in Paris, and 6 weeks later it's orange. And so an expendable labour force that can quickly shift from purple to orange is what is needed in these countries, and so people become expendable in it. What we're asking is that we're working with NGOs on the ground who are pushing at the local level for change, and what we're asking people to do is to push their favourite fashion label and retailer and say, we want you to push from this end. Mm-hmm. We want you to put in place the right protocols, the right codes of conduct. We know that a code of conduct in and of itself isn't going to change the world, but it can lead to a change of culture. And buyers can be told it's actually the way that these workers are treated that is as important in the culture of our business as how cheap the product is.
Josh, to what extent do you think it's a matter of improving policies or information for consumers or enforceability of labour standards, for example?
Well, our experience is that many of the large buyers in Australia have wonderful policies and wonderful guidelines, but it doesn't stop workers being killed in the factories in Bangladesh. And also the core issues of abuse and underpayment and the issues which aren't really about the built environment, aren't about whether the structure is okay or aren't about whether the fire systems, fire alarms and the fire sprinklers are okay. Those things aren't the primary concern. The primary concerns for workers are about being paid for all the work they do, and well, that's pretty much their core concern. And so whilst having the policies is important, their enforcement is by far the most glaring problem that are faced at the moment. And for us in Bangladesh, where 5 million workers, 5,000 plus factories, including the subcontractors, there is only a union density of something like 5%. And to be frank, those 5% probably aren't what we would consider a union in Australia.
And you obviously think that needs to be improved.
But for us, the only way really to resolve the issues of these workers in Bangladesh is for them to represent themselves in democratic free trade unions where they can represent their members and achieve the things that they need to, just like we achieved an 8-hour working day here, OHS laws, superannuation, weekends, child labour laws. Those things didn't come about through the charity of the First World or charity of the West. They came about through workers being mobilised together and amongst themselves. The capitalism in Bangladesh has taken an entirely different form for what we faced as workers in our country or in the West over the last 150 years. If workers want to take a strike now, they face tanks with water cannons with dye in them so they can be tracked down later. In Bangladesh, there is literally an industrial police force armed with shotguns and machine guns that are only there to police garment workers. it's an entirely different battlefield now for those workers, and so the enforceability really must be driven by the workers, and that's what we're interested in facilitating. The government in Bangladesh needs to do a great deal more, and they are really lagging a long way, and they're facing some repercussions from that from the Americans and from Europe. But for us, the way to achieve a satisfactory outcome in the longer term is through a mobilisation of the workers.
And how do you see consumer boycotts then fitting into that strategy?
Well, boycotting it, in our view, is a final solution, and sometimes it has a place. But in terms of Bangladesh, it's just unrealistic to say that a boycott of one country or of one brand is going to deliver an outcome. And to be frank, it probably doesn't allow us to take responsibility for what we need to take responsibility for. These workers are human beings, and we need to share our responsibility for them as our brothers and sisters. I think that any Australian who spends a little bit of time with some of these workers or even sees their stories will understand their responsibility to help them achieve fairness and justice in their own environment. It's just not okay to have young women give up their lives in the hope of something better for their kids, working 16 hours a day with their kids sleeping on the floor. We would never put up with it here, and we shouldn't put up with it there. So a boycott is a too simplistic solution. What we want to see is a lot more people involved in informing themselves and their communities and getting involved in action, which will bring about a better environment in Bangladesh.
You're nodding, Carolyn. You agree with that view?
Oh, well, certainly in India. India has great laws. Sometimes people can wiggle through international protocols and national laws and state laws, and that's where some of the abuse happens. But India has signed on to most of the international labour agreements. The issue is creating the pressure that says that these laws actually need to be enforced and empowering the people to do it. And in these societies, very often it's women who are mostly exploited, and they don't have the same position in society as we've come to expect in society as Australian women. And so they're very much marginalised. When we hear their story, we have an obligation to tell their story, and we have an obligation to make change.
Terrific. Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for on this week's episode of The World From Below. I'd like to thank our guests, Carolyn, Kitto and Josh Cullinan. I'd also like to thank all our crew and producers and our host, RMI TV. You've been watching The World From Below. Thanks for joining us.